take this time to invite Dr. Tim Stratton for his opening statement on why the Christian God exists. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us at the King's Academy today, which, hey, let's be honest, it just might be the coolest high school on the face of the planet right here in West Palm Beach, Florida. I love coming to Florida, and it's truly a pleasure to be here with you tonight. So thank you for being here. You know, I really want to thank my good and dear friend, Richard Suttles, for being willing to have this conversation in the lion's den. He's surrounded by TKA lions, am I right? So he's truly in the lion's den tonight. But you know, Richard and I have agreed to something unusual as far as debates go. We really care about each other. And so this isn't about scoring gotcha points tonight. It's just two good friends testing ideas side by side in front of all of you. So it's not a big deal. And here's the deal. I know Richard cares about me, and he knows that I care about him and that I want the best for him. So neither of us are here to defeat the other guy. So I'm sorry if you came here looking for a fight. It could happen, but I don't think it's going to. Instead, we simply want truth and love to guide this conversation as we compare and contrast our opposing views. So tonight, my dear friend and I are going to debate in love an important question. Does the Christian God exist? That is to say, is it more rational to believe in Christian theism over any other worldview? I believe that it is. Now, that's not just an academic curiosity. If the Christian God exists, then every person in this room was created on purpose and for a specific purpose. But if God doesn't exist, then we're nothing more than cosmic accidents with no objective purpose, ultimately just fleeting and meaningless sparks eventually swallowed up by a mindless and indifferent universe. Well, I think that we're more than that. In fact, I believe that Richard is much more than that. And that's one reason why I love the guy so much. So instead of just rattling off arguments tonight, I want to frame this simply. If the Christian God exists, what would we expect to find in the world around us? Well, there's far more evidence that we could discuss tonight. For the sake of time, I'm simply going to focus on 4 things that we would expect to find if the Christian God exists. And not coincidentally, these are exactly what we do find. First, if Christianity were true, we would expect to find scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. For centuries, many atheists assumed that the universe was eternal, but modern science has upended that. From Einstein's equations to Edwin Hubble's telescope to the discovery of cosmic background radiation to the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem of 2003, blah, blah, blah. Every line of scientific evidence points to the same thing. The universe, all of nature, matter, time, and space began to exist. Think about that. Time, space, and all matter had a starting point. It had a birthday. Cosmologists call this the Big Bang. But the universe cannot create itself if it doesn't exist in the first place. That's not just scientifically impossible, it's logically incoherent. Things don't just pop into existence from nothing. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. In simpler terms, whatever has a birthday has parents. And the universe began to exist. The universe had a birthday. That means there must be a transcendent cause beyond time, space, and matter. And that's exactly what we'd expect if the Christian God exists. Here's how the argument looks formally. Premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. There we go. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Conclusion. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Okay, great. Well, what kind of cause? Well, the cause of all nature must be, by definition, supernatural, something other than nature. The cause of all matter must be immaterial and spaceless, since matter can't exist apart from space. And the cause of all time must be timeless, without beginning, eternal. And since nothing happens in timelessness, unless the timeless entity has free will to choose to create or not create, then the cause of the universe must be personal, because only persons have free will. Now notice, I don't have a Bible up here with me right now. I have not touched a Bible to reach these conclusions. By simply thinking logically about scientific data, we can rationally infer that the cause of the universe is a supernatural, immaterial, timeless, eternal, and personal being with free will. That sure sounds a lot like God, the God revealed in the Bible. If Christianity is true, we'd expect logical reflection on scientific evidence to point toward God, and we have that. If atheism were true, we wouldn't expect to have what we have. Second, if Christianity were true, we would expect to find not only moral awareness in humans, but a deeply ingrained sense of moral obligation, grounded in objective purpose, empowered by free will, and followed by accountability. We would expect humans to recoil at injustice, believe that sacrifice for others is good, and believe that love is not just a feeling, but a moral duty, a choice. That's exactly what we find. Let's start with the famous line from Chief Justice Robert Jackson, the lead prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials against the Nazis. There is a law above the law. This transcendent standard, which the world recognized was true, was used to convict the Nazi leaders, not based on the laws of Germany at the time, but on a higher moral law that they were obligated to obey and free to disobey. The verdict assumed three things. One, an objective moral law exists that's true for all people, regardless of personal or cultural opinions. Two, that humans are morally obligated to obey that law. And three, that humans have the free will to either obey or disobey that law. But here's the rub. These three pillars only make sense if God exists. If humans were not created on purpose and for a purpose, then there is no objective purpose or moral standard to align with. If all of our thoughts and actions are determined by non-rational, mindless forces, then moral freedom is an illusion. And if there are no ultimate consequences for moral behavior, then moral accountability collapses. This leads us to a moral argument for God's existence. Premise one. If God does not exist, objective moral obligations are illusory. 2, objective moral obligations are not illusory. 3, therefore God exists. Let's clarify with an expanded argument, one that I call the ultimate moral argument. Premise 1. If God does not exist, then humanity is an accident of nature and completely determined by nature. 2. If humanity is an accident of nature and completely determined by nature, then there is no objective purpose to human existence. Humans have no control over their behavior, and there are no ultimate consequences for human behavior. 3. If there is no objective purpose to human existence, humans have no control over their behavior, and there are no ultimate consequences for human behavior, then objective moral obligations are illusory. 4. But objective moral obligations are not illusory. After all, Chief Justice Jackson was right. There was a law above the law in which Hitler and the Nazis were supposed to adhere. They had the power to adhere, but they failed. They were guilty. 5, conclusion. Therefore, there is an objective purpose to human life. Humans have control over their behavior, and there are ultimate consequences for human behavior. 6, therefore, humanity is not an accident of nature and completely determined by nature. 7, therefore, God exists. Now look, If you disagree with this argument, you're left with the uncomfortable position of denying that the Nazis were properly convicted at Nuremberg. Sticking up for Nazis is an extremely heavy price tag. Don't recommend it. Now, for my friend Richard, a former U.S. Marine, thank you, and a man who has devoted his life to Homeland Security, to protecting us, and the protection of human objective and unalienable rights, well, that's a costly claim and a heavy price tag, because America is based upon the foundation that logically grounds objective human rights. Maybe you've heard of it before. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if atheism is true, then Richard's entire life's work has been aimed at defending an illusion and a lie. There are no objective or unalienable human rights unless we were created by a God who endowed us with value, purpose, freedom, and moral worth. So consider the Declaration of Independence argument. Premise 1, if God does not exist, then the Declaration of Independence is false, and humans do not possess objective and unalienable rights which ought not be violated by anyone, including governments. 2, the Declaration of Independence is true, and humans do possess objective and unalienable rights which ought not be violated by anyone, including governments. 3, therefore, God exists. Let's say it bluntly. If racism is really wrong and humans have the power not to be racist, then God exists. If rape, murder, and genocide are really evil and humans can refrain from doing them, then God exists. Atheistic naturalism gives us no objective moral target, no free will to choose to aim at one target or another, and no reward or punishment based on how we aim. Christian theism, however, gives us all of these: purpose, power, praise, and punishment. Purpose. We were created on purpose and for the specific purpose of love. Power. We are able to love or not. Praise and punishment. Our love, or lack thereof, matters forever. We will be praised or punished for how we choose to live now. That's why the Nuremberg trials were not just a mere moment in history. They were a window into moral reality. And that reality only makes sense if God exists, and more specifically, if the God revealed by Jesus exists. So the next time someone tells you that atheism can account for objective morality, ask them, can it account for objective purpose, for free will, and for ultimate accountability? If not, then it cannot support a moral universe in any robust sense. But Christianity can. That's what we'd expect if Christianity were true, and that's exactly what we find. Third, if Christianity is true, we'd expect to have real freedom, the kind of free will required to think rationally and infer truth about ultimate reality, what we call metaphysics. Here's the problem for atheism. If naturalism is true, then everything we think and do is ultimately determined by the blind motion of matter. That is to say, as C.S. Lewis noted, if all is determined by the laws and events of nature, then reasoning is something that happens to us, not something we do. Blind and mindless physics doesn't care about metaphysical truth. Again, our beliefs about ultimate reality. And yet, on atheism, it would seem to control every thought and belief that Richard or I have ever had about metaphysics, like God exists or atheism is true. But if all of our metaphysical beliefs are determined by non-rational, mindless forces that know nothing about metaphysics and don't care if we do either, then why trust any metaphysical belief, including the belief that atheism is true or that Christianity is false? Christianity offers a better explanation. a personal, loving, and intelligent God gave us libertarian freedom, what I simply refer to as free will, which gives us the real ability to think, to reason, to evaluate this debate tonight and conclude this argument makes sense and that one doesn't. That's not wishful thinking. It's the foundation of rational thought. If we weren't free, we couldn't even have this rational debate right now. Instead, you'd simply be watching a puppet show. And the puppeteer, mindless and non-rational stuff that knows nothing about the topic of debate and doesn't care if you do either. This mindless puppeteer is determining everything about you, including everything you think and believe. Here's a simple argument. Premise 1. Richard's belief that he lacks the free will to think is either determined by mindless stuff, determined by a deceptive being, completely random, or because Richard has the free will to think. 2. Richard's belief that he lacks the free will to think is not determined by mindless stuff, determined by a deceptive being, or completely random. Those are all untrustworthy sources of metaphysical knowledge. 3, therefore, Richard's belief that he lacks the free will to think is because he has the free will to think. So here's the problem for my dear friend. If he claims to possess metaphysical knowledge like God does not exist, or Christianity is probably false, or all things about humanity are determined and we don't have free will, then on atheism or robust naturalism, mindless stuff which knows nothing about metaphysics and doesn't care if he does either, determines all of his metaphysical beliefs and everything that he's going to say tonight. So if Richard is right, then Richard is just a puppet of mindless and non-rational stuff. But you see, that erases justification for Richard's beliefs about ultimate reality, which means it erases knowledge of reality, which means that Richard he doesn't know what he's talking about tonight. Sorry, Richard, that's my only zinger, I'm sorry. On the other hand, if he admits that he doesn't possess metaphysical knowledge, then why should anyone take any of his metaphysical claims that he's going to make tonight seriously? It makes more sense to start with the assumption that we really can do what we're doing right now, that Richard can infer metaphysical knowledge, and then ask, does atheistic naturalism give Richard the tools to do what he's doing right now? No, it doesn't. But Christianity does. You see, if Christianity were true, we'd expect to be created in God's image, free thinkers, free from the deterministic grip of mere matter and physics, able to reason and know the truth about ultimate reality. You see, if the God of truth, John 14:6, desires all people to know the truth, 1 Timothy 2:4, to reason together, Isaiah 1:18, to take thoughts captive, 2 Corinthians 10:5, before bad thinking takes us captive, Colossians 2:8, so that we can know the truth about ultimate reality that sets us free, John 8:32, then we'd expect to be able to engage in metaphysics and actually gain knowledge of ultimate reality. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. You see, tonight's debate is either a mere puppet show or it's actually evidence of the existence of the God that Jesus revealed. Premise 1. If robust naturalism is true, then God and or things like God, like humans made in God's likeness, do not exist. 2. If God and or things like God do not exist, then humanity does not freely think in the libertarian sense. 3, if humanity does not freely think in the libertarian sense, then humanity is never epistemically or rationally responsible. 4, humanity is occasionally rationally responsible. 5, therefore, humanity freely thinks in the libertarian sense. 6, therefore, God and or things like God exist. 7, therefore, robust naturalism is false, the most common atheistic view. And 8, the best explanation of God, things like God, and the libertarian freedom of humanity is the biblical account of reality. Finally, and most crucially, if the Christian God exists, we'd expect him to reveal himself in history. And we would expect to be able to make a case using the historical method to show that the resurrection of Jesus was a real event in the past. And that's exactly what we find regarding the historical facts about Jesus. Even skeptical historians often usually agree on certain facts. That Jesus of Nazareth was a real person who lived around 2,000 years ago. That he was crucified by the Roman government. That his tomb was later found empty. That many people then claimed to see him alive, and they were willing to die for that claim. And the epicenter of the explosion of Christianity started shortly after his crucifixion in Jerusalem, the same place where everybody saw him get killed. What's the best explanation of those facts? A hallucination? A conspiracy? Those theories collapse under scrutiny. Hallucinations like that aren't shared by multitudes of people at different times and places, and they certainly don't explain an empty tomb. Conspiracies based on known lies don't turn cowards into martyrs. So the simplest, best explanation is the one the first Christians gave. He is risen. If Christianity were true, we would expect to have historical evidence of the resurrection, and that's exactly what we have. So let this sink in. If Christianity were false, we would not expect to be able to use the historical method to show that the resurrection of Jesus was a real event in history. Thus, since a historical case exists for the resurrection of Jesus, and the best explanation of this miraculous historical event is the existence of God, a rational person is justified in rejecting atheism or any other view and concluding that Christianity is true. In fact, I contend that a rational person ought to do just that. So in conclusion, does the Christian God exist? It is more rational to believe in the God, is it more rational to believe in the God revealed by Jesus over any other view? Well, look, I've argued that if Christianity is true, we should expect four things: a universe with a beginning, an objective law above the law that humans are obligated to obey, the kind of free will that makes rationality possible, so that we can even have this debate right now, and a real event in history, the resurrection that changed the world. And that's exactly the world in which we live. If the Christian God does not exist, all of these facts demand separate, strained, and ad hoc explanations. But if he does exist, they all fall into place, like puzzle pieces snapping together perfectly. Well, tonight, I'm not just asking you to consider my arguments, I'm inviting you to look at reality itself and ask, what would we expect? What would we expect to find if Christianity were true? And do we find it? Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Now I would like to invite Mr. Richard Suttles up for his opening statement on why the Christian God does not exist. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm sure you guys have seen debates, maybe on YouTube, that was contentious between an atheist and a Christian, and they screamed at each other, and they just stayed that way, and it just kind of got uglier and uglier. It's not going to happen like this tonight. We've known each other. We know each other's worldviews very well. So I hate to say this is going to be a very friendly discussion, a very productive discussion. For the slides, I'm actually going to use one of his. It's one of the last slides where he mentions, it's kind of an overview of his four views. It might be the very last slide. That's it. Did any of you guys ever, when you were told stories, did you ever hear about the two artists that were hired for this hallway, for this majestic hallway? And one artist was a really great artist, and he painted all these wonderful pictures on this side. But the other guy, he just polished the wall until it was a mirror and it was a reflection of the other guys. Has anybody ever heard that? I was raised at a Christian Southern Baptist summer camp. They went over that story. That was one of our stories. I'm going to do that tonight. I'm just going to use his slides rather than bring my own slides. I'm just going to mirror him. These four things that he just brought up, we're going to pretty much stick with those for the entire night. I'm just going to say how I view those things. And then when we have our discussions and when we answer questions, we're going to pretty much just bounce those 4 ideas off. So if you guys remember anything, remember these 4 things, because if he's talking about them and then I'm talking about them, then you probably will be able to take this home and remember this. Some of you probably already know it already if you're taking classes with Dan, but I want to keep things simple and just going to keep this conversation very organized. Remember, the first thing he said was the cosmological argument. Everything began to exist. And another one that goes along with that is fine-tuning. Have you guys ever heard fine-tuning? Anyone here know that one? What about necessity and contingency? Anybody? All 3 of those are kind of tied together. If you think about it, you don't even have to think about Christianity. Just that, the fact that there's all this stuff and that it works so well, that it's hard to believe that this is all an accident. And that's very important. So I want to make sure you guys remember that. My daughter, I've got 2 high school daughters. The youngest one is a believer. And when someone was trying to convince her when she was 4 years old that there was no God, and I remember I was driving and she was in the back seat and she was looking out the window. She had heard this for the first time, that there's no God. And she said, but look at all this stuff. At age 4, and that was just her genuine first response, look at all this stuff. And I told her, I said, that's a good argument. That's a really good argument. I'm not going to really push back on cosmological or fine-tuning or necessity or contingency. If I wanted to, I would say, how do we know that cause and effect were in play at the very beginning? Once we could measure space and time, how do we know, if there wasn't time yet, how do we know that cause and effect was in play? So a lot of even atheist cosmologists say, we don't know what was happening, and then suddenly space and time got to a point where we could measure it, and then the laws within it, we could measure that. So if I wanted to push back, I would use that. But let's just keep those. Let's just give him a point for that one. The cosmological, look at all this stuff, as my youngest daughter would say. Let's just give him a point for that one, because that's a good one. By the way, at some point you might say, well, that might give you theism, but remember, we're arguing about whether the Christian God is true. That's the point of this debate. And I'm going to argue maybe theism. I'm one of those people that says, could there be something? Maybe it's possible. I don't think that Christianity is true, and so that's where I'm going to keep my focus, is that in my view, I don't see how Christianity can be true. That's going to be different than me saying that you have to accept that it can't be true. But just to kind of give you a caveat of how I'm going to argue tonight. So the second one is the moral law. He says a law above the law. And you remember he says the moral law would be objective. This would be like an ontological existence of what we ought to do despite us. It doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter what our views are. This law would exist above us, and then we would perceive that, and then we would discover it. It's different than creating something because you're discovering it. We didn't discover, think of something that you discovered in your lives. You didn't create it, you found it. So it was already there, and then you found it. And so he's saying this would be indicative of a higher being, of a perfect God. For morality, I'm gonna merge morality in with his third one. When it says the freedom to make rationality possible, just rational thinking, the ability to reason. The way that I see reality, the way that I see how reality works and how humans work, is that morality and reasoning works together. Whenever we're reasoning, we're also bringing morality into it. And this is something that atheists often get wrong, because a lot of atheists say that, well, morality is just kind of the social rules that you discover, but it's not something that's really binding. But if you really talk to somebody that's an atheist and you find something that's really important to them and you nudge them a little bit, you'll see that they start to get angry. And I'm going to say that we do all perceive objective morality, even if it might not be a real thing. And I'm thinking it might not be a real thing. I'm thinking it might be illusory. And I remember he said in his opening that if it's all illusory, then what does it matter? I'm going to say that it really might be illusory, but it matters because we're going to obey our moral compulsions. And you guys, you're all old enough now to where you faced something that you knew was wrong and you stood up or you didn't. And if you didn't stand up, you felt terrible about it and you learned next time that you were going to stand up. Or you found somebody else who didn't stand up or didn't make a stand and you got mad that they didn't make a stand. That perception is real. I think that's a biological reality of humans, that we do actually perceive an objective moral ought. Like he said, if you ought to do it, then it's a moral term. In my opening statement, when I wrote it out, I used the word oughtism. Everybody has oughtism. If you think there's an ought, then I say I have oughtism, and everyone has that type of oughtism. You really ought to do it.
That's a good one.
Thank you. And I made that up. So if anybody gets in trouble, it's on me. But I think everybody perceives that, and so an atheist might say, "Well, not me. It's just social glue, and I don't think that it's subjective." He still probably, you'll find something that he probably gets angry and says, "Hey, you can't see this. This is wrong." Some of the things we'll argue about in the Bible. At some point we'll talk about parts of the Bible because we are talking about the Christian God. Atheists get angry about those parts of the Bible that they think are violations. They're like, this is objective moral violations. So they are perceiving moral violations. They do perceive that ought. And I'm going to argue that humans are very much like that. In fact, I use a metaphor of songbirds. I don't know how much you guys know about songbirds, but when the bird is born, the community has a song, and that song is out there waiting for that bird. Even though he has no idea, he's still young, he's not even thinking yet about, where's the song that he's going to sing, but he's going to sing it. And all the biology is already, and the potential for that song is already in that bird. And he's going to grow up, and he's going to begin singing the song. He's going to learn about the song from the other birds in his community, and he's going to sing that song. And I think humans are like that. We grow up in the community. There's a potential inside of us that says, hey, I'm going to embrace whatever this social glue, this moral norms in my community, and then I'm going to uphold that and I'm going to defend it. So I think that's something biological. And notice that the song and the songbirds, it's not a material thing. It's an immaterial thing that came from earlier. It's just outside of the community, almost hovering above them, waiting for them to sing it. And yet that song pressures that community to sing the song. And they sing that song, and then that's what keeps them together. And that song endures past each of those birds. However long a bird lasts, none of them last longer than the song. The song outlasts all of them. So I think that Christianity is an example of that. It's something that has outlived every human that's ever been a Christian, because we grow up with this need to uphold our social and moral norms. I think that's biological. So yes, Christianity has endured 2,000 years, but I would argue that something was going to. If we could somehow go back in time and keep Christianity from happening, there would be something else. Would it be as good? I don't know. But there would be something, and we would probably be upholding that. So that's how I see morality. It's not that I say that there isn't objective morality, just that we all definitely think there is, and then we argue about which one is right. So I want to make sure that you're clear on that, because we're going to have a lot of discussions on this, and I want to make sure my position is kind of a nuance. I wanted to make sure you understood it. And then this freedom to make rationality, the reason why I think that ties in is that we all really do think we're reasoning. All of us, atheists, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Mormons. My wife and I and our two daughters, we live in Mormon territory, so in Arizona. Everybody, all of our neighbors are Mormon. Our mayor, our city council, the doctors, the lawyers, anybody who's anybody, all the power players are all Church of Latter-day Saints. Them too. They're like, hey, we're just following the data. Never mind the feelings and all that stuff. We're just reasoning. We're just rationalizing our way through the data. People say that, but a lot of reasoning is something called motivated reasoning. And motivated reasoning means there's a conclusion that you're going to get to. You're going to get to that conclusion. And you come up with all these arguments. But in the end, they ultimately go to where you were going to go anyway. Something in the back of your mind says, do all the reasoning you want to do. But at the end of that reasoning, you're going to be here. I know it. Because there's a deep, dark part of our mind that does that. So I think, and this is for atheists and Christians alike, I'm not claiming the high ground. I'm sure I do it more than anyone. But I think we are all guilty of motivated reasoning more than reasoning. And morality has a lot to do with it. Because you're thinking, this is an ought, this needs to happen, and that affects how you reason. So he's talking about how morality and reason point to God, and I'm not dismissing them. I'm just saying that I think they're more biological and more natural, rather than something that's been imprinted upon us from above. That's also going to be important when I talk about how morality and reason work together. And then finally, for the resurrection, I have another sort of nuanced position for this. And a lot of atheists, especially these days, a lot of atheists just say, okay, well, this was made up later, and there's no real reason to believe that Jesus was a real person and these stories came later. I'm one of those who believes that he was a real person. Like what he said, like what Dr. Stratton said, that a lot of secular scholars believe that there was a historical Jesus. And there was a group of Christians right after he died who came to believe that he had risen, or at least that he was the Messiah. I argue that he had a group of several hundred, 400, deep followers who were with him all the way, and he was killed. And then at some point, very, very soon after that, a small group of them said, no, he's still the Messiah. And they just wouldn't let it go. And that's what I think happened. I think they wouldn't let the story go. How did that come to the talking points in 1 Corinthians 15? You guys know that? You better know that one. It would be on you if they didn't know that one. The earliest parts of the New Testament, the earliest Christian creed is in 1 Corinthians 15. That original batch of Christians were repeating that together very, very soon after Jesus died. I can make a case that they were doing that within a year. So I believe that all happened. I just don't think it was a resurrection. I think they came to believe it. I think he was an icon who passed away. They still had a desperate need for a Messiah, and they found a way to make it true. And I also think that small batch of people in Jerusalem weren't really historically significant. They stayed there, and they stayed until the Romans kicked them out a few decades later. And then most of them moved to, I think it's called Pella, I forget where they went. But that original batch wasn't really a success story. It was Paul, who even taught something that they wouldn't have agreed with, which was they thought he was the Messiah and that he was the fulfillment of their scripture as they saw it, and that people had to obey the Jewish laws. And Paul said, well, no, you don't have to do that. First of all, he was a Roman citizen, so he was allowed to go all over the Roman Empire. And these disciples, probably not. I think Peter, I'm not sure the whole story of Peter, but it looks like Peter was able to go throughout the Roman Empire. But a lot of these guys, they couldn't. And so Paul did. And he had this other story. That's where Christianity came from. And now, did Paul do it all by himself? Was he the tip of the spear? I don't know. But he was the best writer. And so that's what I think happened with Christianity. And I think that's a human story. I don't think that's a resurrection story. But I wanted to make sure I do accept that Jesus was a zealot, which I think is a good word. I think he was very committed to what he believed in. I think he was upset with the Roman authorities. He was upset with the way the Jewish people were handling their situation. He was upset with the way people interpreted Scripture, and he stood up. And he probably had a chance to shut up and stay alive, and he chose to keep talking. So in that way, I do think that he was a real true fighter. So I do believe that all that stuff happened. I don't know how I'm doing on time. A couple more minutes. I just wanted to say there's one thing I skipped over real quick when I went over the word zealot. I think that everyone, like I said, everyone interprets the word ought. They all have this moral ought. I think that everyone has a meaning system. There's these things that they perceive as meaningful and ultimately meaningful. And that meaning and that morality work together. And if you get to the point where you start defending your meaning system and you think it's even more important than yourself, and you're like, hey, this is so important, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to talk to people about it, even though I'm going to be in trouble or I'm going to be unpopular, that's what I would call a zealot. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. There were zealots for terrible things. But you could be a zealot for something great. I think Jesus was a zealot for something that was very good. So when I say zealot, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. I think everyone's like that. I think everyone can be a zealot. Obviously, there's different scales. Some people just kind of say, hey, just leave me alone. And their zealotry is just, let me do my thing and don't bother me. But some people really have these these really strong beliefs and they want to talk about them. You'll see atheists who are more passionate than any Christian you'll ever know. So it has nothing to do with religion. I think that it's all very biological and it's all very human-oriented. So again, tonight when we're all talking, you're going to hear me talk about a conflict between our own self-interest. Sometimes you're interested in taking care of yourself, but you also have a sense of cooperating with others, and then you also have this sense of zealotry. So those three senses are kind of always within you, sometimes in harmony, sometimes fighting each other. And you're going to hear me talking about that a lot during our questions and answers. But I wanted you to know I think that's a biological reality for how all humans are. Even if Christianity wasn't a thing, I think we would still be that way. We would be arguing over different religions. As I say, if we could erase all the current religions and go back a few thousand years, something else would take their place. And it could be awful things, but it would be something. It would be some sort of intellectual, moral system, probably based on some supernatural agent behind them. And then we would be arguing about whether or not that was true. And we'd be in this auditorium still arguing about whether that was true or not. I think that's just something about human nature. And I think that's it. All right, thank you.
Well, gentlemen, thank you both very much. We have enjoyed listening to the opening statements. We're going to continue with our event this evening by doing a bit of a cross-examination, but in a more informal kind of coffee shop sort of setting. So we're going to let them go ahead and have that conversation. So go ahead and please continue our discussion.
Can I go first? Okay.
Thanks for joining me for coffee.
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. Is this working?
Is this on? Check one? Okay.
Another thing I want to clarify, I didn't have this in my opening, but I'm not one to say that everything is determined. I think that there's a lot of problem solving across reality, even at the cell level, at the cellular level. There's a lot of problem solving, and if there's any problem solving at all, then there goes determinism. Because determinism, you're not solving problems, you're just following a script. But problem solving means you have various options and you want to reach your goal. And it's not just humans, again, there's cells doing this, and there's things within cells doing this. So I don't think that determinism is true. What I do think is that there's a whole bunch of stuff that affects what you do. At the human level, whenever you make a choice, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened before that heavily affects what you do, but I don't think that it forces you to do it. So I want to make sure we got that.
Yeah, can I ask you about that?
Yeah.
A little bit. So you said there's reasoning happening at the cellular level.
Yes.
Are you saying that cells are reasoning and thinking about things and trying to find the truth?
See, now this is weird because I do think that. And you young people, write this name down. His name is Michael Levin. He's a scientist. He's an atheist scientist. Mm-hmm. He's showing that cells have goals. So and it's outside, interestingly, that's outside of DNA. And so there are a lot of atheist scientists who are mad at this atheist, and there's others too, but make sure you remember Michael Levin and write it down because he's the best at talking about it. He's saying that the cells outside of DNA have goals and that they go after that goal. And then when they reach the goal, they stop. So he's like, it's outside of DNA, it's within the cells, it's a bioelectric language between the cells. And when he told me that, it freaked me out. But once I read through his stuff,
I'm aware of that.
Okay.
What is the goal of these cells?
It depends. But like one of the experiments that he showed was for a flatworm. If you dissect the worm, it's either the head. If you dissect the head grows back. If you dissect the tail grows back. What the scientists did was they realized that the cells had a language, and they said, okay, we've lost the head, we need to rebuild a head. So there was an bioelectric signal for that. They took that signal from those cells, they cut off the tail, and they put the signal for grow a head at where the tail was. Mm-hmm. So the cells were about to say, hey, let's build a tail here. The scientists changed it to put a head here. You had a two-headed worm.
So I think
the cells...
It's pretty aming.
Right. And
it almost seems like it's finely tuned by an intelligent designer.
Right. You can say that, but here's the problem. The DNA hasn't changed. It's now the same specimen, so the same DNA now has two heads, and when it replicates, both ends become two-headed.
So
again.
Okay, so I see how you're using the term goal.
Problem solving and goals, yeah.
But I don't think it's the same way that I'm referring to it when I'm talking about the ability to engage in metaphysics and rationally infer truth about ultimate reality. And that's really what I want to focus on. It's what the free thinking argument is focused on. What you're describing is something that happens at the cellular I can't say that word. It's a big word.
Yeah.
I usually I get in trouble from my wife with using too big of words. Now I can't say it. Cellular. There we go. But that is a deterministic outcome. The cells don't have the choice to say, I will or will not do what I'm going to do here. They don't have free will. And they're not thinking about things. They are ultimately programmed. And they move according to their program. So I guess that what I want to focus on, I mean, the cells don't wonder if God exists.
Right.
And the cells don't wonder if free will exists. The cells aren't atheists, they're not Christians, they don't have a worldview. And so when I'm talking about rationality, we have a goal, Richard, you and I do, of getting to the truth about ultimate reality. And tonight is all about metaphysics, the truth about ultimate reality. It's beyond what science can even tell us. That's why it's called metaphysics. It's beyond beyond physics. And so cells can't do that. Animals can't do that. Trees, plants, they can't do that. It seems to be something unique to humans. And we can engage in rational deliberation and bracket our thoughts, bracket our biases. Nobody's perfect at it, but you and I both try, right? So I want to talk about that kind of freedom. And you said, yeah, we engage in reasoning at the biological level, but at the biological level is determined. Most scientists would say, anyway, I think the vast majority would say. And so if that's the case, if our reasoning is determined by biology, and biology, physics and chemistry, is also completely deterministic, it seems that ultimately, if your worldview is true, then our thoughts and beliefs, your belief that atheism is true and my belief that Christianity is true, isn't even up to us. It was up to mindless stuff that knows nothing about metaphysics and doesn't care if we do either. What do you think about that?
I was going to write something down so I didn't forget. So I'll try to remember while I can. You brought up a couple of things, and I want to make sure, especially the students, remember this, because I think apologetics is going to change in a couple of years, because it's turning out that a lot of atheist scientists are disagreeing about whether biology is determined. There's a scientist out there named Robert Sapolsky who's atheist. He wrote a book called Determined, because he does say that it's determined. What he's really arguing is he's listing all the things that happen before a decision that heavily affect a decision. He's not really talking about what kind of decision making is happening. There's another guy named Kevin Mitchell. So remember that name, Kevin Mitchell. He's also an atheist. He's also a well-known author, not as high as Robert Sapolsky. He says that there is free will when you're making decisions. He understands the heavy influence behind it, but he says they're still solving problems. Kevin Mitchell and Michael Levin will both say that it's not determined, even at the cell level. They're exploring problem spaces and they're coming up with solutions. And they even say that their definition of intelligence is the ability to reach the same goal through multiple methods. So they know the goal that they want. They try this, it doesn't work. They try this, it doesn't work. They try this and it works. They said that's when you get intelligence. And until you get intelligence, below intelligence, you can have some sort of problem solving. You're trying to get something, but you're not just following a program. And that's what I meant about the DNA. DNA is programming. DNA will say, hey, this is the protein that you're going to make, and it's going to go here. That's programming. But this is something outside of that. And by the way, these atheist scientists have no idea where this is coming from. They know the bioelectric signals is how they're talking, but they have no idea where this agent is that's saying, hey, I want a leg here, or hey, I want to put a goal here. Where are these goals coming from? How do other things beyond minds or lesser than minds, how do they know that there's a goal and that they want to reach it? They don't know. So they're not making any claims about what that is. They're just saying that's a real thing. And other atheists are getting mad because they're saying, you're implying that there's purpose in biology. And they're saying, yes, as atheist scientists, we are saying there's purpose in biology. And I want to make sure you guys know I believe this. I think that's true. Yeah, and someone, I think it was a coach here earlier today, said, hey, we all have faith in something. He was telling me that. And I was like, I agree. We all have faith in something. And I believe in this purpose in biology, this problem solving across reality. I think that's a real thing.
Man, that's a great point. It just seems to me if there's purpose in biology, that is actually evidence of a creator who programs it with purpose. But let me quickly discuss Sapolsky. If people are interested, I've written an article on my website, freethinkingministries.com, called the Sapolsky Paradox. And like you said, he is a determinist who rejects free will. And the kind of free will that I'm talking about here is free from physics and chemistry, which would include biology. So free from these things that are, if everything that exists is matter and natural, the kind of stuff that science can test and discover, if that's all that exists, it seems like all that exists would be determined by the laws of nature. Now, there is, I think with what you were referring to, some scientists who don't think that all is determined. They would appeal to the quantum realm, right? With quantum physics, that's popular in movies these days, if you haven't heard of it. But in the quantum realm, the jury's out there. There's a big debate among physicists if the quantum realm is deterministic or not. Like I said, the jury's still out. I'm open to following that evidence. But if that's the case, that's why I worded the argument. If you can, let's put it up there. It's the one where I referred to Richard by name. And I think the way you're using, when you said you believe in free will, I don't think it's the same kind of free will that I'm affirming. But it's...
I agree, it's not.
You don't have it anymore? Okay, well, I won't use your name this time, but I'll say the determinists, the determinist's belief that he does not have free will is either determined by mindless stuff, that would be chemistry, biology, atoms, subatomic particles, mindless stuff that doesn't know anything about metaphysics or free will. All right, so the determinist belief that he does not have free will is either determined by mindless stuff, determined by some deceptive being, maybe a nefarious neurosurgeon or something, completely random, which would get us to the quantum realm. Right? That's just randomness. It's things that might not be determined, but they're just random and not for reasons. Or the final option is because the determinist actually has free will. And I say premise 2, the determinist's belief that he does not possess free will is not determined by mindless stuff, not determined by a deceptive being, not completely random, or in another other way I could word that is determined by the quantum realm, which knows nothing about metaphysics. But it's because he has free will. So then therefore, the person who rejects that kind of free will rejects it, if he's rational, rejects it because he has free will. And so it's a self-defeating position. So I want to push back on saying, okay, well, this is happening at the cellular level or biologically, because biology, physics, chemistry doesn't know anything about the existence of God. It doesn't know anything about free will. It doesn't know anything about metaphysics. And if these things, or if the quantum realm itself, which might not be determined, if the quantum realm, if undetermined, still determines our thoughts and beliefs, then we haven't escaped any problems. So I give it back to you. What do you think about that?
Right. I don't think there's a way to escape the problem. I think no matter what you think, other people are going to question it, and hopefully you still have doubts, no matter what you think or how you've found that or how you justify that. So I'm okay with that, especially with this, what I'm talking about now. These atheist scientists who are saying that there's a problem-solving, problem-exploring aspect to reality across all scales, that takes away what atheist scientists have been saying for years, which is that there's no purpose in biology, it's all chaos. And then whenever a protein accidentally leads to something beneficial, then evolution copies that. These other atheist scientists are saying, no, that's crap, that's not true. So now the atheists are fighting. No Christians are in the room. So there's a guy named Dennis Noble. I know I keep throwing names at you, but remember these names. Dennis Noble is saying that Richard Dawkins is wrong, and they've been doing it the same amount of years. So this idea that it's chaotic and then something is accidentally good, then it gets repeated just because that's what can. These other scientists are saying that's not the case.
So how could that help? How would that deliver metaphysical beliefs in your brain that are trustworthy? That's my question.
I think trustworthy comes from trial and error. I think all of us, we hear what we should do. We probably test the waters a little bit. We learn our lessons. Those of us who are still here, the reason why we're still here and the reason why we behave better than we probably did at first was we learned. And so I think trustworthiness comes from trial and error and then still being here. Because sometimes you learn a lesson and it's too late. But if you can learn a lesson and then get back into life, then that's where I think trustworthiness comes from.
So you said we do trial and error.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back to what C.S. Lewis noted.
Yeah.
Reasoning doesn't happen to us. We do it. But what he means by that, it says when we do the reasoning, that we are the source and this active power that is choosing to take our thoughts captive, to bracket our biases, to try to think as clearly and as carefully as possible, to do our due diligence. If we don't have that power, then the manner in which we experience sensations of reasoning merely happens to us. And again, what is making these happenings happen? It would be mindless, non-rational stuff that knows nothing about the topics we're debating. So my question, I want to bring it back to this. On that view, how can you trust your metaphysical beliefs? I would say that you are in a position that leads to epistemic meltdown regarding your metaphysical beliefs because you don't have any reason to trust them. Because on top of that, you say that we do the trial and error, but the same stuff that is determining false metaphysical beliefs in the first place would also be determining the manner in which you experience the sensations of doing the trial and error. So I don't see any escape from this, and it is what my doctoral dissertation is on.
Yeah,
so, what do you think?
I'm okay with it. I'm very pragmatic. And you guys, you can't see these numbers across here on the stage. I don't know if any of you are in drama or theater, if you have been up here and you see these numbers here. And I don't know if anyone ever tried this on you in high school, and they said, okay, you go from 0 to 1, but if you cut them in half, then you have half. And if you go in between 0 and half, it's a fourth. If you go between 0 and fourth, it's 1/8. But if you keep going into half, eventually you go into oblivion because at some point, there's no number that you can think of between. So then they say, well, how can you go from 0 to 1? There's no point. You can't, there's no foundation. It's all infinite emptiness, void. How do you go from 0 to 1? But you just do. Here they are. So I'm very pragmatic, and I see what you're talking about, but I'm thinking we're born with these compulsions, and we're going to do it. We're going to take a stab at the world, and then those of us who are still here, we're going to learn from our mistakes. We're going to say, I wanted to get this. We have our goals. I didn't get it. I'm going to try again a different way, and that's how we become. That's how we start to build our worldview and how we're going to navigate life. And I see what you're saying. There's not something solid there. But there's not anything solid here in math either. But we just do it. I need to go from 2 + 2 = 4. It's true that I can't get from 0 to 1, but I'm just going to do it. I think people are like that too.
Can I ask you this?
Yeah.
If Christianity is true, and the God of truth, John 14:6, who desires all people to know the truth, 1 Timothy 2:4, who's given us the power to reason together, Isaiah 1:18, so that we can know the truth that sets us free, John 8:32, so we can and take our thoughts captive, 2 Corinthians 10:5, before bad thinking takes us, Colossians 2. If that's all true, and we are then made in the image and likeness of God, as it says in Genesis 1:26, if that's true, can you see how we would expect to be the kinds of people who can do the reasoning and who can infer truth about ultimate reality? Like, we do have free will. God does exist. This is what God is like. But if it was just biology, physics, and chemistry running the show, all mindless stuff, maybe it helps us survive in the physical world, but it would do nothing to help us know about metaphysical reality. You and I both believe that Mormonism is false.
Right.
But man, that belief system, it's a metaphysical belief system that does a really good job of leading to procreation. And so we see that on evolution itself, if evolution is true with naturalism or atheism combined, and you're aware of this with Alvin Plantinga's reasoning.
Yes.
All that evolution would do, run by physics, chemistry, and biology, is get you into a position to survive so that you can procreate, so that your genes can advance. But it doesn't care at all about your beliefs about ultimate reality. In fact, like I said with the Mormon view, false beliefs can lead, in Islam too, you know, well aware of that.
Right.
Those false beliefs do a great job of leading to procreation. So what would you, with all that said, do you see how Christianity would provide a better foundation for epistemic trustworthiness when it comes to metaphysical beliefs? There's a bunch of big philosophical words right there.
Right. Well, and now you guys remember I'm the bad guy. And so I'm going to be, making some arguments against Christianity. The first thing I would say is there are some really great Christians. And I was raised by that in that church, in that summer camp. I was raised in church and raised in a summer camp. And I just know a lot of great Christians. But there are also people claiming that title who do a bad service to the name Christianity. And not only that, it's such a popular word now that propaganda artists use that. And so, yeah, I study counterterrorism, but I also study propaganda, and I study how other organizations try to take our minds captive, and so that we start thinking for them rather than for ourselves. They've realized that the word Christianity means a lot, so they just start with it. They're like, what are we going to sell? We're going to sell cornflakes. Okay, start with Christianity. Why? Because it works, it resonates. Start with that, and then we'll get to the cornflakes. So you guys are going to be, if you haven't already picked up on this, you guys are just going to be pounded by noise from social media and everywhere you turn, and it's going to get worse and worse, and they're going to use the word Christian. So when you're talking about Christian, I know what you mean. You're talking about people like you. And yes, if you're, does anybody, man, some of you kids, you probably don't even know Little House on the Prairie. Do you know Little House on the Prairie?
Yeah.
My dad always said, be as Charles Ingalls as possible. And he wasn't even a Christian, but he was like, Charles Ingalls, be as much like him as you can be. And I still try that. So that's what you mean when you say Christian. And yes, the Charles Ingalls type Christianity, I think, is really good for society. I don't know that makes it true. Your angle about epistemic justification, for me, I'm much more pragmatic. I'm much more interested to see how a family operates and how a community operates. And as you know, we're surrounded by Mormons in our community. For them, it's not just procreation. It's about community building. They're very big on having really good doctors. And even though some of the stuff they believe is weird, the doctors know doctor stuff, and the engineers know engineer stuff, and the city planners know city planning stuff. So it's more than that. It's how to make a successful community. For me, that's more important than, I don't want to dismiss epistemic justification and metaphysics, but I'm much more interested in seeing a healthy community and healthy families flourish. And I'm biased because I work in counterterrorism, and I see so much of the other way, where families and communities fall apart. That I've decided to become an anti-terrorist, and so that's why I do this. I never try to make anyone an atheist. I try to make sure that they understand what makes people become a terrorist and to not do that. So it's not really answering your epistemic and metaphysics, but I'm much more focused on that than what you're saying.
Yeah, I see. Well, let's shift a little bit,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Again, I really, one of the reasons, Richard, why I look up to you so much is I'm really kind of jealous of your jobs. I've told you earlier that one of the biggest regrets I ever had was not joining the military myself, and you did it as a Marine. And now you're Homeland Security, fighting to keep us safe. So really, thank you. What do you think about the argument I made about the Declaration of Independence, where the Declaration, the philosophical foundations of America that you've devoted your life to, notes that we get these objective and unalienable rights from our Creator.
Okay.
I said, I explained why that makes sense, because if God exists, then we were created on purpose. If atheism is true, we weren't created on a purpose. If Christianity is true, not only were we created on purpose, but we were created for the objective purpose of love. Jesus makes that clear when he gives the two greatest commands. He says, hey, I know I've given you a lot to think about, everybody, a lot of commands. Start with the Sermon on the Mount, but just get these two right. Everybody love everybody. But first love God first above everything else with every fiber of your existence, and then everybody just love everybody. That's why you exist. So then we say, okay, love. We ought to love each other. We ought to seek the best of everybody. But if atheism's true, that's not true. If Islam is true, that's not true. And in fact, we could just go down the line. I'd say really Judaism, and I'd throw Mormonism in there too. I mean, those can start to make sense of it, but Christianity really tightens those screws down with Jesus making it clear why we exist. Paul does it again in Galatians 5:14. Check that out. He says the whole law can be summed up in love. Just love people. But that is that law above the law of love that is found in the New Testament specifically. Now, if Christianity is true, that's an objective law, a law above the law that's true apart from anybody else's opinion. And so that's what made the Nazis truly guilty, and that's why we were able to convict them. And it seems rightly so. Would you say that the Nazis were incorrectly convicted?
See, here's what I think. I would have also convicted the Nazis, and then someone says, well, based on what justification? Where's your ultimate higher justification? And I would say, I'm just going to do it, because what they did was against other people. And then someone could say, well, your way is no different than theirs. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to do it. I get that. I get that there should be something higher. And the Nazis thought theirs was higher. They thought they had met some higher calling.
And they argued that way during the trials.
Right. Yeah. And so it really was it's a competition. This, I definitely want to answer what you said about, is there a foundation for human rights, for treating people as if there is as human rights? I want to answer that, but I also want to say we're in a competition. Everybody in this planet is in a competition for whether you're going to be the kind of person who wants to wipe out people who don't agree with you, or whether you're the kind of person who wants to try to cultivate and help and treat people as if they have value. What he was saying, this principle about treating people as if they have value, you'll see Christians who forget that. They get so angry and so caught up in something that they stop treating people as if they have value.
True.
You see that if you listen to, I'm pretty conservative, and I listen to podcasts sometimes, and some of the conservative podcasts have forgotten to treat each other as if they have human value. And I get the left has too, and I'm not saying that they do, but I'm just saying sometimes the most Christian of Christians can forget that. We're in a battle to whether you should treat people as if they have human value, or whether you should treat them as if they're a disease. And you'll meet people who treat others as if they're a disease, and you'll see it on TV and social media, and they feel righteous. They don't feel dirty. Like when a bank robber does something wrong, he knows he's robbing banks, he stays quiet. But when you're treating people as if they're a disease, you feel righteous. You want to talk about it. So terrorism is a different crime than someone who's robbing banks or harming innocent people. They know it's wrong and they're trying to stay hidden, whereas terrorists they feel righteous. They're not harming people. They think they're cleaning diseases. And that's a battle. That's something that we're all fighting. And so I always push to make sure that you're the kind of person that's not trying to wipe out people as if they're diseases, treating them as if they have value. But to answer your question, I can't justify that. It's a competition. So, and I've talked on other church stages before, and someone has asked me, well, it's just a battle of wills then. It's you versus them. And I say, okay, well, bring it on, because it's a battle. I'm in that battle. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay that I don't have a justification. And I'm sure if I was talking to somebody from ISIS, he would say, well, I do have a justification. I would say, okay, well, I'm still going to try and stop you. Even though he gets a justification and I don't, I'm still going to do it.
Well, I'm glad about that. So thank you.
Right. Yeah. So, and it's a battle to the death, but I think that's how reality is. I think we're all in a battle to either be here or not. And that doesn't mean we start fighting each other. to stay alive, because if we started doing that, then our society would collapse. So we have to treat each other as if we have human value. So I don't know that that's a justification that you would like, but I am going to do it. That's who I am. That's my faith. That's my my banner or whatever.
And that's why we get along.
Right. That is why we get along.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really have enjoyed listening to both of you. I'm sure all of us have. One of the pleasures I have as being the moderator is to cut the conversation when it's getting good. So I apologize. But right now we're going to transition to going ahead with our closing statements for both these gentlemen. We are going to start off with Mr. Richard Suttles. You can go ahead and have...
I was going first, but I don't care. You go first.
Oh, you like to
have the last word.
Okay, that's fair. All right, then we will have Dr. Tim Stratton go ahead and give his final 5-minute statement and closing statement, and then we will switch to Mr. Suttles. Thank you.
First of all, please give Richard a round of applause for being in the lion's den. Can you tell why I love the guy so much? Well, tonight I've argued that belief in the Christian God is not only reasonable, but it provides the best explanation of reality. I've defended 4 key points. First, if Christianity were true, we'd expect to have evidence of the beginning of the universe, Genesis 1:1. And that's exactly what we find. The universe began to exist, and this points us to a supernatural, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, and immensely powerful and personal cause with free will, which perfectly fits the description of God revealed in the Bible. Second, objective moral values and duties exist. There is a law above the law. We've all witnessed horrendous evils over the past few months, and our souls simply know, we intuitively recognize when we see objective evil that misses the mark of the law above the law, that law of love. But if atheism is true, then the murders of Irina Zarutska and Charlie Kirk were not really wrong. It's just personal opinion and subjective tastes. Just preferences, things that are impossible to avoid because they would be determined. But doesn't that seem absurd? Christian theism logically grounds morality, moral reality, and the nature of a God who is love, 1 John 4:8. Third, humans are not merely wet robots. We are rational, free agents who actually have the power to freely think, free from the laws, forces, and events of nature. We have the power to reason and make rational choices. We are ultimately responsible for how we think on these important matters. But if atheistic determinism is true, we're not responsible for any of our thoughts and beliefs, including the belief that atheism is true or the belief that Christianity is false or anything else like that. On Christian theism, however, our rational freedom to infer truth about ultimate reality makes sense. Fourth, Jesus of Nazareth not only claimed to be God, but he rose from the dead, leaving behind an empty tomb, eyewitnesses willing to die for what they saw, and a movement that transformed the world. The resurrection is God's stamp of approval on everything that Jesus said, taught, and exemplified. And let me briefly say this. If Christianity is true, then the world full of evil and suffering and all the kinds of things that we don't like is exactly the kind of world that we should expect. A world with real love must allow for real freedom. A world with real freedom allows for real evil. But God allows only as much evil as is necessary to bring about the greatest good into the eternal and infinite future and the ultimate defeat of evil. And here's the kicker. Because of the problem of evil, God sent the solution. The gospel is not just a doctrine. It's a cure for the disease of sin, separation, and suffering. If you have this final slide, put it up there. Let me explain what Christians call the gospel. The good news, using an acronym, GOSPEL. G, God, the perfect being, a maximally great being, created all people to live in an eternal loving relationship with him. That is the objective purpose of life. O, our sins infect us and separate us from God. Like oil and water, perfection and infection do not mix. S, here's some bad news. Sins cannot be removed by your good deeds. There's nothing we can do to cure ourselves, no matter how many good things you do. And Richard is one of the best people. He is a good man. But it's like filthy rags. That's what Isaiah says. So we're in trouble, but let me tell you the good news. P, paying the price for sin. Jesus died and rose again. That's the miracle we needed. He became the cure. He paid it all. E, everyone who freely trusts in Christ alone and does not reject his offer of love and grace has eternal life. John 3:16, by the way. L, life with Jesus starts now and lasts forever. That's the good news. That's the cure for evil. And if you have your phones, feel free to take a photo of that so you can memorize it. But that's the invitation to each and every one of us. You see, if Christianity is true, we would expect the world to be exactly as it is, full of evil, pain, and suffering, and also full of so much good. We would expect all kinds of evidence, scientific evidence, human rationality, and historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, which also provides the cure for our disease, the gospel. So if you've heard arguments tonight that stir something in you, don't dismiss it. Ask yourself, what best explains the world that we live in, the longing of our hearts, and the truth of history? The answer is Jesus Christ. And I invite you to follow the evidence where it leads. Jesus invites you to enter a personal and loving relationship with him forever. And Richard, Jesus invites you to do the exact same thing. He loves you even more than I do. And I love you a ton. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stratton, very much. Now we will be able to listen to Mr. Richard Suttles' closing argument.
Oh, here's my pen. I was looking for my pen. Okay, remember this debate was whether Christianity is true. And I would say if you're like a Charles Ingalls Christian, in fact, when I meet people who are very much like a Charles Ingalls Christian and they talk about how they see the resurrection, I don't really push back on it. I don't say that's ridiculous. I think another atheist recently said he thinks it's more plausible than he used to think, Alex O'Connor. I don't push back on that. I do think my explanation is probably more realistic, that people came to believe it, and I base that on how humans are now. We come to believe really weird things. I've got some good friends who think that one of the best apologists in the world was secretly in on a conspiracy theory against another leading Christian who was killed recently. I can't even imagine knowing they know this guy. Why would they think that? People come to believe the craziest things. And so I'm not too surprised when I hear that people come to believe things. It doesn't, for me, the fact that it's real isn't always my top choice. So I think it's realistic to think that they came to believe it even if it wasn't true. However, I don't get mad for you guys when you do believe that it does. So can it be reasonable? I'll concede that it can be reasonable. If you're a Charles Ingalls type Christian, I probably won't push back on you at all. If you're one of those Christians who now thinks that one of the apologists was secretly in on a conspiracy, then I probably will push back. I'll probably nudge you more than a Charles Ingalls Christian, and Dr. Stratton says he will too. So the kind of Christian you are really matters. I really want to push that more than saying you shouldn't believe. the kind of person that you are really matters. And if you're a Christian, great. There's different kinds of Christians you can be, and that's changing. Those options are becoming bigger every day with social media. And so again, my whole business is watching people go crazy, so I try to fight that. The last thing I want to say is to young people, and this isn't really related to the debate, what you do tomorrow is going to have a lot to do with what you did today. You're very much a pattern. I don't care if Christianity is true or not. You are a creature of patterns. So if there's something right now that you're doing consistently that you wish you would stop doing it today, you're less likely to do it tomorrow. You are a creature of patterns. What you did yesterday will heavily affect what you do today. I sound like I'm talking to my kids. I tell this to my kids. Every time I get in front of an audience with kids, I say, remember the patterns thing. Because if you can't get that right now, it's harder to do it when you're 40. So start thinking about that now, creature of patterns. And a lot of you, since you're Christians, you already got good patterns. That's great. But if you don't, start working on that now, some of the patterns now. And if you meet some of your friends, by all means talk about Christianity, but also talk about those patterns. If you can get them to change their patterns now, it'll be much easier in the future. That's it.
Well, please join me in thanking both of these gentlemen once again. I really appreciate all that you guys have done. That concludes this event. However, if you would like to stick around, we will have an optional Q&A session